Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tuning into the really fascinating history of electronic music. It started way, way back, like the early 1900s.
Yeah, it's got deeper roots than many people think.
And for you listening, if you're keen to, really get how music production works, how sounds are made and messed with, we got some interesting stuff coming up.
Absolutely. We're going to trace that line from the very first clunky electronic instruments right up to the digital tools we use today, and we'll really dig into sampling.
Yeah, sampling's huge. I think there are probably some surprises in how this tech evolved.
No,
Right?
definitely. And how it completely changed the game for making music.
Okay, so let's go way back. The start of electronic sound. It sounds almost like, I don't know, old sci-fi movies, like the Telharmonium, 1897. That sounds ancient. What was the deal with that?
It was remarkable, really. Thaddeus Cahill's idea with the Telharmonium was basically an electric orchestra. It used these enormous rotating electromagnetic generators, think huge dynamos. Yeah, creating tones purely from electromagnetic energy, not vibrating strings or anything acoustic. The sheer scale of ambition was, well, pretty incredible right from the start.
That's wild. And then, okay, early 20th century, things get a bit more weird. Ethereal. The theremin, owned as Martinot. They have such unique sounds.
They really do. Completely different sonic worlds. The theremin, the one you play without touching?
Yeah? Spooky.
Right. It works with your hands messing with electromagnetic fields. And the Honest Martinot had that ribbon controller, giving these really expressive, almost gliding sounds. Totally new ways to handle pitch and tone.
So, moving on a bit, mid-20th century. Magnetic tape arrives. Seems basic now, but just recording sound. That must have blown musicians' minds.
Oh, it was a total paradigm shift.
Yeah.
Suddenly you could capture sound reliably, but maybe more importantly, you could transform it.
Right. Not just playback.
Exactly. You could physical cut tape, split bits together, run it backwards, change the speed. You could actually manipulate the sound itself. That opened up possibilities you just couldn't get live.
And that directly feeds into these experimental scenes, yeah?
Yeah.
Music Concrete in France, Pierre Schaeffer. And electronic music in Germany, Stockhausen. They sound kind of academic.
Well, the names might sound formal, but the ideas were radical. They started treating recorded sound as the actual building block of music.
Okay.
So, Music Concrete used like everyday sounds, recordings from the environment, bits of instruments taken out of context. Electronic music focused more on sounds made purely electronically.
So different approaches, but the same core idea. Sound itself is the material.
Precisely. They really challenged what melody, harmony, rhythm even meant. It became much more about texture, timbre, the quality of the sound. Hugely influential, even now.
Okay, so from cutting tape with scissors, we jump to the 60s, 70s. Synthesizers. Robert Moog. You can't talk electronic music without saying Moog. What made his stuff so revolutionary?
Moog basically made generating electronic sound way more accessible, more immediate. Synthesizers let musicians build sounds from the ground up using circuits. You've got an oscillator making the basic wave,
Right.
a filter to shape it, cutting or boosting frequencies, and an amplifier for volume. Moog's genius was making these modules you could connect any way you liked. Huge control over sound design.
And that's when it really crossed over, wasn't it? From labs into like actual studios and pop music.
Exactly. That was the key shift. It wasn't just for experimental composers anymore.
And it just exploded. Synths became core to, progressive rock, disco, and of course, Kraftwerk. They basically wrote the rule book for electronic pop, didn't they?
They really did. Kraftwerk fully embraced the synthesizer's own sound, its possibilities. They weren't trying to mimic acoustic instruments. They celebrated the electronic textures, the precise rhythms, that sometimes robotic feel.
Yeah, that clean, futuristic sound.
Right. Repetitive, minimal, but somehow still human. Their influence is just immense.
Then the 80s roll around and we get MIDI. Sounds technical, but it was another huge leap for creativity.
Massive. MIDI musical instrument digital interface was like a universal language for electronic gear. So for the first time, different synths, drum machines, computers could all talk to each other. You could control everything from one keyboard or sequencer. Suddenly, making complex layered tracks was much, much easier.
More power, more accessible.
Exactly. It fueled this explosion of creativity and efficiency.
And that leads straight into genres like house, techno, hip-hop taking off. It's like MIDI just opened the floodgates.
Precisely. Being able to sync everything up easily was crucial for those developing scenes. They all grabbed MIDI and ran with it in their own ways.
So let's zoom back in on sampling. You mentioned it earlier. We hear the term all the time. What is it, practically speaking?
Okay, so sampling at its core is just taking a little piece, a sample from a sound recording that already exists,
Right.
and using it in a new piece of music. Could be anything, a drum loop, a little melody, someone talking, a sound effect.
Yeah.
It's like grabbing a sonic Lego brick.
But producers don't just copy it, right? They mess with it.
Oh, absolutely. That's key. Samples are like raw material. You layer them, you use EQ to change the frequencies, make them fit. You can speed them up, slow them down, change the pitch completely.
Make it unrecognizable sometimes.
Yeah, or loop it to create a rhythm or a texture. The manipulation is where the creativity really comes in.
Okay, so this idea,
Mm.
borrowing sounds,
Mm.
transforming them,
Mm.
it didn't just pop up with digital samplers in the 80s.
Mm.
Were there earlier things pointing this way?
Definitely. You can trace it back, like we said, Musique Concrete in the 40s. Pierre Schaeffer physically cutting and looping tape. That's basically manual sampling.
With scissors and tape. Must have taken forever.
Incredibly painstaking work. He even built a machine, the phonogene, kind of a keyboard that played back these tape loops at different pitches. Very early precursor to playing recorded sounds musically.
Oh.
And you had composers like Pierre-Henri, Stockhausen again, John Cage, Varese, Nanakis, all experimenting heavily with tape manipulation.
And wasn't there something with the BBC, like for TV shows?
Right, the BBC Radiophonic Workshop. They took these avant-garde tape techniques and used them to make sounds and music for popular shows, Doctor Who being the most famous. They got really good at creating these amazing soundscapes with tape for a huge audience.
So it's filtering into the mainstream, sort of.
Yeah, in a way. And then you look at Jamaica, the dub reggae producers King Tubby, Lee Scratch Perry.
Oh, yeah.
They weren't sampling in the modern sense, but they were taking existing reggae rhythm tracks, stripping them down, manipulating them with echo and reverb, creating instrumental versions, rhythms for DJs. That focus on deconstructing and reworking recorded rhythm tracks was hugely influential later on.
Even Holger Suke from Cannes, the German band, he was known for splicing tapes together in really creative ways too, right? Before digital.
Absolutely. It shows this recurring desire among musicians to treat recorded sound not just as a finished thing, but as something flexible, something you can reshape. These were all steps towards digital sampling.
So how did we get from sticky tape and reel-to-reels to the digital samplers we think of now? What were the key bits of tech?
Well, it was a gradual thing. Some point to the Chamberlain back in the 40s as a kind of proto-sampler. It had a keyboard triggering individual tape loops inside it.
Each key played its own little tape. Sounds complicated.
It was. The Mellotron in the 60s made that tech famous. You hear it all over prog rock. But the real shift to digital was probably Peter Zoneviv's EMS Muses in 69. That's often called the first digital sampler, moving from physical tape to bits and bytes.
Okay, digital begins, but the word sampling came later with the Fairlight.
That's the story, yeah. The Fairlight CMI, 1979. Kim Ryrie and Peter Vogel were actually trying to synthesize sounds better, but found recording real sounds and playing them back digitally sounded way more realistic.
Huh, like an accidental discovery.
Kind of. And even though it was limited by today's standards, memory, editing, all that its interface made recording and playing samples much easier, they coined the term sampling, and it just stuck.
And then things got cheaper and better, right? EMU emulator, Akai S950.
Exactly. Those brought sampling to more musicians. And at the same time, drum machines like the Oberheim DMX, the Lin LM1 started using sampled drum sounds instead of just synthesized ones. Made beats sound much punchier, more real.
And then the Akai MPC, 1988. That feels like a really pivotal moment, especially for hip-hop.
Oh, the MPC was huge. It put sampling, sequencing, and pads for triggering those samples all into one box. It was intuitive, hands-on. You could just bash out beats. That workflow basically defined the sound of so much hip-hop and electronic music after that.
That tactile feel.
Yeah, very performance-oriented.
And now it's all software, mostly.
Yeah.
DNW's digital audio workstations, Pro Tools, Ableton Live. Sampling is just built in.
Exactly. Modern DAWs have incredibly powerful sampling tools, way beyond those early machines. And alongside that, you've got this explosion of sample libraries, sample packs.
Right, like Zero G, Spectrasonic started selling sounds.
Yeah.
Apple gives you tons with Logic. Now there are websites where you just download loops and hits.
Yeah, Splice, Loop Cloud, specialist libraries like Kingsway. It's a massive industry. Finding sounds is totally different now. than digging through crates of vinyl for a good drum break.
You mentioned interpolation briefly, too. What's the difference there again?
Right, so interpolation is when you re-record a part of a song rather than using the original recording.
Ah, okay.
So instead of sampling, say, a melody directly, you'd get musicians to play that same melody again for your track. You still usually need permission for the song itself, the composition, but not necessarily for the original sound recording. Gives you more freedom to change the sound.
Got it. Sampling uses the original audio. Interpolation is a new performance of the original idea. Makes sense. So the impact of sampling, it's obviously massive, especially in pop, hip-hop, electronic music.
Undeniable. Some people say it's as important to their genres as the electric guitar was to rock music. It's also fundamental to remix culture.
And hip-hop. You can't really talk about early hip-hop without talking sampling, can you?
Not really. It grew right out of DJs looping breaks on turntables, especially drum breaks from funk and soul records. That was manual looping before affordable samplers existed. The samplers just made it easier and opened up way more possibilities.
You mentioned some early tracks using samples.
Yeah, Stevie Wonder's Journey Through the Secret Life of Plants from '79 is often cited. Yellow Magic Orchestra in Japan were early pioneers too. David Byrne and Brian Eno's My Life in the Bush of Ghosts in '81 was really innovative with using found voice recordings.
Right.
And bands like Big Audio Dynamite were mixing samples into rock pretty heavily early on too.
And then in 80s hip-hop, it was all about those James Brown breaks, right? Funky drummer.
Oh yeah. Classic tracks like South Bronx by BDP or Eric B. as President. They leaned heavily on James Brown samples. That really popularized the technique. And once samplers like the MPC got cheaper, chopping and looping those breaks became the signature sound of hip-hop's golden age.
What about DJ Shadow's Introducing? That album gets mentioned a lot.
Yeah, Introducing from '96 was a landmark because it was made almost entirely from samples of other records. Guinness World Records even called it the first album made just from samples. It showed you could build whole, complex pieces just from these borrowed sounds.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And some samples just keep getting used over and over, like the Amen break.
Totally. The Amen break, that little drum solo, must be in thousands of tracks. Drum and bass, hip-hop, everything. The Think break, too. Even that classic orchestra hit sound that was everywhere in the '80s started as a Fairlight sample.
It's wild how these tiny bits of audio become iconic.
Mm.
Are there artists who get sampled more than others?
According to sites like Who Sampled, James Brown is way out in front. Thousands of tracks sample him. Loliata Holloway's vocals are sampled constantly, especially in dance music. Their stuff just works really well as source material.
Okay, so we've touched on this, but let's really underline the difference between then and now in terms of actually making this music. Modern tech makes it so much easier.
Right. That's a huge point, yeah. Today, you've got these incredibly powerful DAWs on a standard computer, massive libraries of sounds ready to go, super flexible editing. The barrier to entry is just so much lower than it was.
Like compared to needing expensive hardware synths or literally cutting tape.
Exactly. Back then, manipulating sound often needed serious hardware investment and technical know-how. Now, a lot of that complexity is handled by the software. It's much more intuitive for a lot of people.
And you can have, I don't know, millions of sounds on your hard drive, edit them with a mouse. It's night and day compared to the old limitations. Storage alone is incredible now.
Totally. That ease of use has really democratized music making. Anyone with a laptop can potentially create complex electronic music at home. The limitations of the old gear forced certain creative choices, which was interesting in its own way, but the flexibility now is just immense.
So we've gone from these room-sized electrical machines to software on a laptop. Quite the journey.
It really has been. So now, hopefully, you have a clearer picture of that whole arc from analog beginnings right into the digital age and how sampling became such a core part of it all.
Definitely. Seeing that history makes you appreciate how much the tools really do shape the music.
And maybe it leaves you thinking, with music creation being so accessible now, with these almost limitless tools and sounds, how does that keep changing music itself? And what does it mean for originality when we can borrow and reshape sounds so easily?